So as we all know, this week's Parsha is the beginning of the 10 plagues. And there's a lot of 10s in Torah. Torah is built on 10. We begin with the 10 sayings of creation. And how did God bring creation into being? So the Torah uses the language of speaking. Obviously, God doesn't speak, it's an image. But the reason that it's described that way is because it seems to us that in the same way that when we talk, after we finish talking, the words are out there, we can't take them back. So it seems like after God created the world, that the world is autonomous. It functions by itself. It's like it's not. It doesn't know its source anymore. Just like words are no longer connected to the one who said them. So the Torah uses image of God speaking. Vayomer Elokim Yehio, God said, let there be light, and so on. And altogether there are 10 sayings there, 10 times that God said so and so. In Parashat Yitro, there we have the 10 commandments, that we know that that's the other big 10. And there God reveals himself. What's the difference between the 10 commandments and the 10 sayings of creation? Again, the 10 sayings, God is concealed. But in the 10 commandments, the whole premise is that God is revealing himself completely. Because of that, also, he uses 2 different names. In Maaseh Bereshit, when he's creating the world, it says, Vayomer Elokim. Elokim is the name of nature, as it were, that God conceals himself within the world. But the 10 commandments begin, Anochi Havaya, I am Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is God's essential name. It's when he reveals himself. But in the middle, we have the 10 plagues. What are they doing there? Obviously, if they're in the middle, there's some kind of intermediate stage. So the usual explanation that's given is that after God created the world, and because the world looks autonomous, there were many nations and people that worshiped nature, or at least they understood nature as being independent of God. They didn't see God above. They saw God in nature, that's it. And nature was what they worshipped. And Egypt was the height of that type of understanding. That we worship nature. We don't worship God. We don't understand. Paro says, I don't know who Avaya is. I've never heard of Avaya. Elokim, I know who is. I've heard of this guy called Elokim, because Elokim is not a person. Elokim is simply nature. It's simply the way that I see the world in front of me. There's no person who doesn't appreciate nature, because if you don't appreciate nature, you're going to fall off a cliff. Right? You're not going to be able to function in the world. You have to respect the laws of nature. But these laws, they have nothing to do with God, who is a personal God. The big discovery of Abraham was that God is personal. What does it mean that it's personal? Nobody says to the laws of nature, look, I need you to stop for a minute. And it says to the gravity, please, I need you to hold back for a few minutes. It doesn't work that way. You can talk all you want. Gravity doesn't care. Personal God means that in spite of the fact that he's the creator and he's the master of everything, he has a personal relationship with you. This means that I can forge a relationship. Relationship is exactly the difference between how I relate to this table and how I relate to another human being. Relationship is called face-to-face. That I now have a face-to-face relationship with God, it means that it's like I'm married to him. I can't treat him like another object in the world. He's not here to serve me in the same way that my wife is not here to serve me. I have to create a relationship with her that will work. Because if I just treat her like she's a table, it's not a marriage. You can marry a table if you want to. If you want to have a face-to-face relationship with another human being, you have to treat them in the proper way. So the same thing is with the relationship with Hashem. That Avram revealed that in spite of the fact that Hashem reveals himself also as nature, but he's much, much more than that. And that you can have a personal relationship with Hashem that you can't have with nature. It doesn't work with nature. The problem was, like we said, that the Egyptians were on the agenda that doesn't work. That you don't need that. Really, it's all just nature. So what Hashem had to do with the 10 plagues, what he did was he broke the concept that nature was independent. And with each plague, he showed that he's the master of nature. So this wasn't exactly a punishment. It also was a punishment. It wasn't very, it wasn't very nice for any of them. But the real concept behind it was to also, by the Jewish people, to heal their image, like people today have an image somehow, that you can get along in the world with just paying respect to nature. That's all you need. You need science and technology. That's all you need. It's not true. You need a personal relationship with God. So those plagues, they were like a rectification of the 10 sayings of creation that left the world looking independent. So this was a very important stage that Moshe Rabbeinu, he brought the world to understand that we need to have a relationship with a personal God and not just with the God of nature. But there's much more than that in the world, and we know that in the last mostly 100 years especially, but this has been going on since the Enlightenment, since the 1800s. There's more and more feeling that it's not just about a personal God that everybody addresses. It's also about what is the meaning of an individual human life. That is a new concept that we didn't have before. Before the 1700s, all of Europe was feudal, not to mention in India and China, which is still probably that way, and many places in the world that are still feudal. And feudal means that there's a small echelon of people in society that they have an individual life, and everybody else is a serf. Everybody else is a servant. And that's a way of thinking that the world existed with for thousands of years. It's not something that is a new idea. But then in the 1700s, something happened. And the world began to change. Now, it changed very, very slowly. Even in America, when they decided to be a democracy, and they said every person would get a vote, it wasn't every person. It was only males, white males, and so on. It took a long, long, long time until they began to appreciate the fact that every human being has a soul. That every human being has to have a vote because it represents the fact that they're created in the image of God. So that took time. Today, it's some people would say it's rampant already. It's running too far. Why? Because it's saying that even if you have nothing, you haven't done anything, no contribution to society, nothing at all, everybody has to respect you like you're now the king of England. He used to be the queen. Right? Like it's something that's very hard for people to understand. What does that even mean? Why would you have to respect someone who really has contributed nothing to society? It was just but that's where it is, and it's gone even further than that. What if a person is even destroying society? Why is he destroying society? Because he doesn't want to have any children. It's the death of society. Because how can you continue to operate if you don't have children? What if he's even worse than that? He says, not only do I not want to have children, I don't want to even have marriage. I'm not interested in the whole thing. So it's going in a certain direction that demands constantly more and more individuation. That the person, the individual, becomes more and more important. Now, this process really started in the 1700s, but like I said, the initial thinkers of the Enlightenment, they didn't apply this to every person. They only applied it still to people who were scholars or physicians, or somebody who was contributing something to society. It took a long, long time until it appeared as something general that applies to every single individual in the world. But the Alter Rebbe in 1789, he was arrested in Russia under charges of treason, that he was supporting the Turkish government. And the result of that arrest was that he would be executed. There wasn't a question. It was clear that he would be executed. And so he went to this arrest knowing that he's not going to come out alive. That was his understanding. And he went with a state of Mesirut Nefesh. Mesirut Nefesh means that he's willing to be a martyr now. He understands that he's going to die in Kiddush Hashem. That's what's going to happen. And yet, in the middle of the arrest, they were interrogating him, apparently to find evidence. I don't know if they really needed evidence, if they really cared. But they went through the motions. And he's sitting in front of an interrogator, and this interrogator says to him, suddenly a question out of the blue, explain to me, what does it mean Why is it that God said to Adam, "Where art thou?" Where are you? Right? Where art thou means where are you? That's how it's in an old English. That's the way everybody knows it, because that's the way it was traditionally translated. Everybody also knows it because of Shakespeare, because it's also in Romeo and Juliet. Romeo, Romeo, where art thou? There it means something a little bit different. It means, why are you sticking to your principles that you're still connected to your father? You still uphold his principles where you should be connecting to me. In any case, where art thou? Where are you? So he asks him, why does God have to ask Adam where he is? He knows where he is. He just created him. He knows exactly where he is. So the Alter Rebbe began to explain, to give Rashi's answer. What does Rashi say? Rashi says that he didn't want to surprise him. He didn't want to scare him. So he started with a pleasant conversation. Where are you? It's like saying, how's it going? Same thing. So he started explaining that, but this interrogator, who's a non-Jew, who has no connection whatsoever, he says to him this amazing sentence. He stops him in the middle, and he says, Rashi's explanation I know. I'm not interested in that. What? First of all, the question, then that he stops him in the middle. And so he says to him, I want to hear your answer. So the Alter Rebbe began saying an answer that he wasn't able to say before. He never published this answer before. This was like the first time he said this manifesto. And he said like this. He said, when God asks someone, a person who is such and such an age, and he mentioned a certain age, where are you in your life? How far have you come in fulfilling your life's purpose? And how much more do you plan on doing? Where are you? That's what he's asking. Where are you in this thing called life? In this expanse that begins when you're born and ends when you pass away. Meaning that you have a purpose, a God-given purpose. And God is asking you, where are you in fulfilling that purpose? Do you know what your purpose is? And how far along are you in fulfilling that purpose? What is he saying here? He's saying this to a non-Jew. He's not saying this to some great Torah scholar. He's even a non-Jew. He says, your life is sacred in the sense that it has purpose. And you have to find that purpose. And you have to know where you're trying to get to. This was a complete revolution in thinking, especially in Yiddishkeit. Because Yiddishkeit was based on the premise at the time that only the Torah scholars have some kind of purpose. It was a feudal type of system that wasn't based on land. It was based on what we call meritocracy. That it depended on how much merit you had. What kind of merit? How much you learned, how much you were knowledgeable, what kind of a scholar you were, how many mitzvos you did. And suddenly he's coming and saying that your life has purpose even if you're not a Jew, even if you have no connection. Because every soul has a purpose in coming down into this world. When he got out of prison, he changed a lot of the way that he taught, and he took this as a sign, because finally, instead of being executed, he was released. And before his release, he talked to, in a spiritual way, he talked to his mentor, the Maggid of Mezrich, and his spiritual grandfather, the Baal Shem Tov, and he asked him, why am I being arrested? Why did this all happen? They said, because you teach Chassidus. And he said to them, so what do you mean, so should I stop? They said, no, on the contrary, you should teach better and more and deeper. And so when he came out, he changed the way that he was teaching. Until then, even in the Tanya, you have to learn the Tanya in order to understand the principles. Even in the Tanya, he wasn't addressing a particular individual. He was still using the language of the Talmud, where you talk about people in a generic way. It's not talking about you or me. The Talmud's not talking about you and me. It's talking about generic people. But suddenly, after that, he began to push this agenda that we now have to talk to each person and first of all remind them. That's why most of his essays, after he was in prison, most of his essays start with the proposition, the soul came down for a reason. There's a reason why I came here. I have to figure out what that reason is, because that's what gives meaning to my individuality. Not just to being a generic Jew. A generic Jew means that I learn what the Shulchan Aruch says, I do what the Shulchan Aruch tells me to do. I'm obligated like everyone else, but I'm no special, I'm no different than anyone else. But when it comes to understanding the story of my life, there's only one person that can do that. And that's me. I'm the only, it's only my life. No one else has the same story. And I have to learn it. There was such a big principle in Chassidut that there was a disciple of the Baal Shem Tov named Reb David of Lelov. He said, in the future, I won't be learning just Masechet Ketubot. I won't just be learning the Talmud. I'll be learning a tractate called the Tractate of David of Lelov. The life itself is something that I need to learn. My life itself is something that I need to learn. What does it mean? That it's not just that I have a personal relationship with God in the sense that I can say to God, I need you to hold the gravity back for a moment. It's not just that. He said it's not the special cases. It's that every point along the story of my life is godly. It is part of the fulfillment of the whole reason that God became my soul. He's immanent inside my soul and wanting to come down into this world to express something, to do something. So that was a tremendous revolution. Now, granted that in the 1789, when the Alter Rebbe came out of prison, most people didn't understand this yet. But he was setting the stage already. Again, even the Enlightenment thinkers couldn't think this way because, again, they only ascribed such a level of importance, of meaning to the most important individuals in the society. They couldn't think about it in terms that every single human being is a soul that came down into the world and it has a purpose. It serves some kind of divine purpose. But the Alter Rebbe was already speaking that way. That's where the concept of Yechidus comes from. The concept that I have a private audience with the Rebbe. Why do I need a private audience? It says in the Shulchan Aruch what you need to do. Because the questions that you ask in a Yechidut, in a private audience, are completely different and they have no answer in the Shulchan Aruch. Right? You can look wherever you want. You won't find answers to specific questions that you need. In fact, when he wrote the Tanya, he said that since I'm beginning to explain how the psychology of a human being works, you can find the answers to all the questions in this book. But it's still generic because it's not talking to you specifically. If you want to apply it, he says in the introduction also, you have to have a mashpia. You have to have someone with whom you discuss this until you can apply it specifically to your life. If you can't apply it specifically to your life, so you're learning psychology, it's very nice, but you never went to a therapist. But the whole point of Chassidut is that I build a system in which I can understand how I work, how I function, and how I get over the pitfalls, how I get over my problems, because that's part of my story. Now, many of the problems a person cannot solve. That's another chidush, another novel idea that the Alter Rebbe brings. The idea is, if in the Shulchan Aruch, if in the halacha, the idea was that by making a bracha on a piece of food, I'm elevating the sparks. That's an idea that comes from Kabbalah, and was well accepted and well known. And I think everybody today feels something like that. Today we call it, I take the energy out of it. Right? But if I say a bracha, it's not just the physical energy, it's not just the kinetic energy or potential energy in it. I'm taking out the divine energy in it. But came the Chassidut and it added a new dimension. It said, not only working on the external aspect of reality and following Shulchan Aruch in order to do that, which is the basic means of human existence. You can't survive without eating, you can't survive without living. All these things are governed by the revealed aspect of Torah, what we call the revealed dimension, the Nigle. The Nigle talks about how should you lead your life so that the basic needs are godly, that you connect them to God. But Chassidut is now talking about the inner life of the person. It's not on the outside. It's not what I eat or don't eat. It's not the holidays I celebrate. It's not the Shabbat. It's none of these things. It's something internal. Chassidut begins to say that there's a mitzvah inside also. What kind of mitzvah is this? It says in the same way that you need to make a bracha over eating food, you also have to connect everything that's happening in your life internally to God also, in the same way that when you make a bracha, you elevate it. You also have to elevate not the sparks outside, but the sparks inside. That's a tremendous chidush that nobody said before Chassidut. That inside, when I deal with my issues, let's say every person has anger issues. At some level, maybe a few who don't, they're not human, I don't know what. But if you're human and you have these problems, and you're able once to overcome it, that's an elevation of the sparks. We don't appreciate it yet. But that is avodat Hashem. That is serving God. That's a tremendous chidush of Chassidut. That to be internally aware of my divine purpose and to connect my emotion and my actions and everything that I have inside, especially my emotions, to connect that to God, that is avodat Hashem. That is serving God. Because that is, we can call it, even the Rebbe said a few times, this is the last frontier. It's the final frontier. There's nothing after that. That is like the coming of Mashiach is when, Baal Shem Tov heard this in Shemaim, when everybody knows how to make unifications like you do. What's a unification? Unification is birur. There's two types of avoda that are talked about by the Baal Shem Tov. There's the regular type of elevating the sparks, that's called birur, avodata birurim, clarification, that's how it's called. But it's elevating the sparks of the material world. But beyond that, there's yichudim. Yichudim are unifications, and unifications are something that happen internally, because unification is related to our consciousness. It's not about the external world. It's about being able to reveal the godliness within. Even if a person, people think, I have to not be angry at all. That's not going to happen. You're going to go through life with these emotions. But in the same way, that person doesn't think that he'll eat now and he's finished. He's never going to have to eat again. There's no such thing in the world. You always have to eat. Every time that these emotions that you don't like and that they hurt you or hurt others come up, it's like eating. You have to now take care of it. Because that is what it means to be alive. There's purpose to every single moment. Even the negative has purpose if you can control it. But even if you can't control it, and afterwards you come and you say, but next time I will. That's tshuva, but it's a strange type of tshuva. Tshuva was usually, I did an avera, I did something that was wrong, and I did tshuva. But here I didn't do, on the face of it, I didn't do anything wrong. I acted fine. I didn't express myself. But by the way, there's nowhere in the Talmud does it say that a person who is angry, it's as if he's serving a false god. It's a statement that doesn't appear in the Talmud. Where's this statement from? It's one of those sayings that appeared. So how it appeared in the 12th, 13th centuries. The Rambam already knew about it in the 12th century. But before that, they didn't know about it. This was like something that was originated. So this whole concept that we have internal work to do, and that this internal work is like the work that we do on the outside. What Yiddishkeit was about until Chassidut, which was only rectifying the physical material world. Now there's an inner dimension to our lives. And this inner dimension is just as much avodat Hashem, it's just as much serving God as it is serving God when we say our bracha. So that's it for, in short.
I have a lot of